The night was colder than usual. A thick fog curled around the empty streets, swallowing the distant glow of the city. I sat alone in my cabin on the outskirts of New Denver, a place where the sky still had stars, unlike the smog-covered metropolis in the distance. I had chosen this isolation for a reason. My past in the military haunted me, the battles I had fought, the orders I had followed. Out here, in the quiet darkness, I could pretend none of it mattered. Then I heard it. A sharp thud against my metal door. My pulse spiked. I wasn't expecting visitors. No one ever came out this far unless they were desperate or dangerous. My hand instinctively reached for the pulse rifle resting against the table. Old habits. War never really leaves you. I crept to the door, pausing to glance at the security screen. Static. The damn thing had been malfunctioning for weeks. Another sound, this time softer, almost like a whimper. Cautiously, I unlatched the door and pulled it open. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A figure slumped against the threshold, barely upright. The porch light flickered, casting a weak glow over the fragile form. A woman. Number not a woman, not human. Her skin was a deep, iridescent blue, marred by gashes that leaked a shimmering, silvery fluid. She was breathing hard, her body trembling from exhaustion or pain, maybe both. Her clothes, if they could be called that, were nothing more than tattered rags clinging to her thin frame. And in her arms, a baby. A small bundle wrapped in fabric, barely visible against the night. The infant made no sound, its tiny form tucked tightly against the woman's chest. She lifted her head, eyes locking onto mine. Even in the dim light, they were mesmerizing, large, luminous, and filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Desperation. Please. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Help my child. Then she collapsed. I caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was light, too light. I could feel the bones beneath her fragile skin. She had been starving for a long time. The baby stirred, its tiny fingers twitching against my chest. It wasn't crying. That worried me. I hesitated, my mind racing. I should call someone. The authorities, maybe. The government had strict policies on extraterrestrial encounters. But I knew what would happen if I did. She would disappear. The baby, too. I looked down at them, this mother and child, abandoned on my doorstep in the dead of night. I had seen war. I had seen death. But I had never seen this. With a deep breath, I stepped back inside and shut the door behind me. Whatever I had just gotten myself into, there was no turning back now. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing us in. The cabin was dimly lit, the glow from the old lantern on my desk casting long shadows across the room. I laid the woman down on the couch as gently as I could. Her breathing was shallow, her body limp. She looked fragile, too fragile to have survived whatever she had escaped from. But my attention shifted to the infant in her arms. The child, her child, was eerily silent. That wasn't normal, was it? Human babies cried when they were hungry, cold, or scared. But this one simply stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Large, violet irises shimmered under the dim light, filled with something I couldn't quite name. Cautiously, I reached out and brushed the fabric aside. The baby's skin was smoother than any human's, a softer shade of blue than its mother's, with tiny, delicate fingers that twitched as it studied me. Its breathing was steady, rhythmic. It was alive. But how long would that last? I turned my attention back to the mother. I needed to help her, but I had no idea where to start. I had seen injuries before, on humans, on soldiers, but never on an alien. The silvery fluid oozing from her wounds wasn't blood, at least not in the way I understood it. What if human medicine didn't work on her? Still, doing nothing wasn't an option. I grabbed my medkit from the cabinet and knelt beside her. Her body twitched as I pressed a cloth against one of the gashes on her arm. A soft hiss escaped her lips, but she didn't wake. The fluid slowed slightly, maybe a good sign, maybe not. As I worked, her fingers suddenly clenched, gripping the edge of my sleeve. I froze. Her eyes fluttered open, barely able to focus on me. Her lips parted, voice raw and weak. Don't let them take her. I swallowed hard. Who? Her hand tightened. The enforcers. The word sent a chill down my spine. The enforcers weren't just any authority. They were the government's elite task force, responsible for keeping extraterrestrial threats under control. If they were after her, she wasn't just any alien refugee. She was something much more dangerous. I glanced at the baby, who still hadn't made a sound, just watching me with those impossibly large eyes. I don't know what you did, I murmured, but you must have pissed off the wrong people. The woman exhaled a shaky breath. I didn't do anything. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but there was something in it, something raw. They took everything from us, she murmured. Destroyed our home, killed my people. I ran so she could live. Her fingers trembled, still clutching my sleeve. Please, she begged, promise me. Promise me you'll protect her. My chest tightened. I didn't do this. I didn't make promises. I had learned long ago that promises were dangerous, that they meant getting attached, and attachment meant loss. But as I looked down at the helpless child in her arms, something inside me shifted. What's her name? I asked. The woman's lips curved into the faintest smile, even as her eyes grew heavier. Zyra. The moment she said it, her body gave out. She slipped into unconsciousness, her grip on me finally loosening. I sat back, my mind racing. The enforcers would come. It was only a matter of time. If they were willing to wipe out an entire species, they wouldn't hesitate to kill a mother and child, or the fool who sheltered them. I let out a slow breath, running a hand through my hair. What the hell had I just gotten myself into? I didn't sleep that night. The woman, Zyra's mother, had fallen into a deep, almost unnatural unconsciousness. Her body was barely functioning, her pulse weak. I had patched her up as best as I could, but I had no idea if she would make it through the night. I kept checking her breathing, making sure she was still alive. And Zyra? She didn't cry, didn't fuss. Just lay there staring at me with those enormous violet eyes, as if she could see right through me. I wasn't good with kids. Hell, I wasn't good with people. But something about her silence made me uneasy. Babies were supposed to cry, weren't they? Yet Zyra just watched me, unblinking, studying me as if she knew I was the only thing keeping her and her mother alive. I exhaled slowly, my fingers drumming against the table. I needed answers. And I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do when the enforcers came knocking. Morning arrived too quickly. The sun bled through the cracks in my window, washing the cabin in pale gold. Outside, the distant hum of drones patrolling the outskirts of New Denver sent a chill down my spine. They were searching. I stood by the window, rifle in hand, watching the sky. The government wasn't subtle when it came to hunting fugitives. If they thought an extraterrestrial was hiding among humans, they wouldn't hesitate to use force. A sharp inhale behind me made me turn. The alien woman stirred, eyes fluttering open. It took her a moment to focus, but when she did, the first thing she saw was Zyra, nestled in my arms. She gasped and tried to sit up. Zyra, she's fine, I said quickly. She hasn't made a sound all night. The woman let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her face. But it was short-lived. She looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I saw the hesitation in her eyes. She didn't trust me. Can't blame her. If the roles were reversed, I wouldn't trust me either. I set Zyra down on the couch and crossed my arms. You said they took everything from you. My voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Who are they? Her gaze flickered to the window, where the distant hum of drones still echoed. The enforcers, she whispered. They destroyed my home, my people. I frowned. Why? She hesitated. Because we exist. That wasn't an answer, and she knew it. I narrowed my eyes. Try again. She swallowed hard, glancing down at Zyra. Our kind, we were never meant to be found. We lived in the shadows of your world for centuries, hidden, surviving. But the enforcers, they discovered us. They called us a threat, a disease. They slaughtered us like we were nothing. Her hands curled into fists, her voice shaking with anger and grief. They weren't after me, she admitted. They were after her. I stiffened. Zyra? She nodded. Why? Silence. I could see it in her eyes, the war inside her. She wanted to tell me, but some part of her still didn't trust me. I can't help you if you don't tell me the truth, I said, my voice low. Why is your daughter so important? She exhaled shakily. Because she's the last of our kind. Her words hit like a gut punch. The last question mark I looked at Zyra, this tiny, fragile being lying peacefully on my couch. She was barely a few months old, yet she carried the weight of an entire species on her shoulders. The enforcers weren't just hunting down refugees. They were committing genocide. I clenched my jaw. And you think they'll stop looking for her? She shook her head. Number, they will come. As if on cue, the sound of approaching engines rumbled in the distance. The first shot hit an enforcer square in the chest. His body jerked back as the force of the plasma round sent him sprawling into the sand. The others reacted instantly, their sleek black visors locking onto my position. Then the return fire came. Blinding blue plasma bolts lit up the sky, slamming into the walls of the crumbling outpost. The air sizzled with the heat of the energy blasts, the scent of scorched metal filling my lungs. I ducked behind a rusted pillar, my heart pounding. I was outnumbered, badly. These weren't just standard government soldiers, they were elite hunters, trained to wipe out anything that didn't belong. And right now, I was standing in their way. I stole a glance at Zyra and her mother. They were huddled in the corner, pressed against the cold stone wall. Zyra's mother clutched her child desperately, shielding her from the chaos unfolding around us. Her eyes met mine, fearful but determined. I wasn't going to let them die here. I took a deep breath, adjusting my grip on the rifle. If I was going to get them out of here alive, I needed to be smart. Another plasma bolt streaked past, missing my head by inches. I cursed under my breath. No more hiding. I shifted my stance, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. A second enforcer dropped. They were moving in fast, spreading out to flank me. I could hear their boots crunching against the sand, their tactical precision as sharp as a blade. They had done this before. So had I. I reached for the old detonation charge strapped to my belt, a relic from my military days. The thing was ancient, barely functional, but it only needed to work once. I activated the timer, 10 seconds. With a quick breath, I tossed it through a crack in the wall, right into the path of the approaching soldiers. Then I grabbed Zyra's mother by the arm. Move! We sprinted toward the back exit, just as the explosion rocked the outpost. The shockwave sent dust and debris flying, the walls groaning under the force of the blast. The screams of the enforcers were lost in the chaos. We didn't stop. The tunnels weren't far, just beyond the ridge. If we could make it there, we'd have a chance to disappear. The woman was slowing down, her injuries and exhaustion weighing on her. Zyra was still silent in her arms, but I could feel the heat radiating from the child's small body. She was burning up. Something was wrong? I didn't have time to think about it. The remaining enforcers were already recovering. The roar of an engine made my stomach drop. A transport was circling around, cutting off our escape route. Damn it! I turned sharply, dragging Zyra's mother with me. This way! We veered toward the rocky cliffs to the east. The jagged terrain would slow them down, but it would slow us down too. I didn't care. We had no other choice. We stumbled into the maze of boulders and cliffs, the towering stones shielding us from the relentless gunfire. But the enforcers weren't giving up. I could hear them closing in, their boots crunching against the gravel, their orders sharp and efficient. Then Zyra whimpered. It was the first sound she had made since the moment I found her. And it wasn't a normal cry. The air around us shifted. A strange hum vibrated through my bones, like static crawling under my skin. The heat radiating from Zyra's body grew stronger, pulsing like an unseen force. The woman gasped. No, 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 not now. What's happening? I demanded. She didn't answer. She was too focused on her child. her expression one of fear, but also something else. Awe. Then I saw it. Zyra's tiny hands began to glow. A soft, golden light pulsed from her fingertips, spreading across her small body like rippling energy. The rocks around us trembled, dust lifting into the air as if gravity itself was bending to her will. The enforcers froze. For the first time, they hesitated. One of them muttered something over their comms. Subject is activating. Activating? The pieces clicked into place. Zyra wasn't just different. She wasn't just the last of her kind. She was powerful. And the enforcers weren't just here to kill her, they were terrified of her. The light intensified, spiraling around Zyra in glowing tendrils. The ground beneath us cracked, the energy rippling outward in invisible waves. Then, with a single, trembling breath, she released it. A pulse of pure force erupted from her small frame, sweeping outward like a tidal wave. The enforcers were thrown back, their armored bodies crashing against the rocks. Weapons shattered. The transport's engine died in an instant, its lights flickering before going completely dark. The world around us shifted, and then... silence. The dust settled. The enforcers weren't moving. Their bodies lay sprawled across the rocky terrain, unconscious but alive. Zyra's glow faded. The energy receded, disappearing back into her small body. She blinked up at me, her violet eyes wide. Then she smiled. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The woman looked at me, her expression filled with emotion. Now you see, she whispered. Now you understand why they fear her. I swallowed hard. Yeah. Zyra wasn't just a survivor. She was a force of nature. And if the enforcers wanted her, they were going to have to go through me. The enforcers wouldn't stay down forever. We needed to move. The woman struggled to her feet, clutching Zyra tightly. There's a place, she said urgently. A sanctuary. Others like me are hiding there. If we can reach it... I nodded. Then, that's where we go. We didn't waste any more time. With the enforcers incapacitated, we disappeared into the canyon, our footprints the only sign we had ever been there. As I walked, Zyra nestled against my chest, her tiny fingers gripping my shirt. I had spent years running from my past. Now, for the first time, I had something worth fighting for. And I wasn't going to let them take her. Not now. Not ever. We moved fast. The enforcers wouldn't stay down for long. Zyra's pulse of energy had knocked them out, but it hadn't killed them. It had stunned them, which meant they'd wake up, and when they did, they'd be more determined than ever to track us down. The woman, Zyra's mother, was still weak, but adrenaline was keeping her on her feet. She clutched Zyra close to her chest as we maneuvered through the twisting canyon paths, our boots kicking up dust. The jagged cliffs loomed overhead, offering some protection from drones, but I knew we weren't safe. Not yet. I kept my rifle ready, scanning the horizon. The desert stretched on endlessly, waves of heat distorting the air. How far? I asked. The woman panted, glancing up at the rising sun. If we keep this pace, a few hours. I nodded. I could handle that. I just had to make sure we survived that long. We traveled in silence, the wind howling through the rocks. Every so often, I'd glance back to make sure we weren't being followed. The enforcers were too well trained to leave obvious tracks, but I wasn't about to take chances. Zyra had fallen asleep against her mother's chest, her small face peaceful. You'd never guess she had just unleashed enough power to take down an entire squad of trained killers. I still didn't understand what she had done back there, or how she had done it. But I knew one thing. The enforcers feared her for a reason. And that terrified me. You never told me your name, I said, breaking the silence. The woman hesitated. Then quietly, she answered. Elara, I nodded. Elara. It suited her. Strong, quiet, wounded. She shifted Zyra in her arms. And you? Who are you? The question caught me off guard. I had spent years trying to forget who I was. The man I had been before. He didn't exist anymore. But I couldn't keep running forever. Jonah, Elara gave a tired nod. Thank you, Jonah. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I deserved thanks. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, baking the landscape in an unforgiving heat. Elara was struggling, her wounds, her exhaustion. It was wearing on her. We need to stop, I said. You won't make it much farther. No, she whispered, shaking her head. We can't stop. We're too close. I frowned. Close to what, exactly? She hesitated. Then, finally, she pointed toward the horizon. I followed her gaze. At first, I saw nothing. Just more desert, stretching endlessly. But then, the air shimmered, like heat waves distorting reality itself. And beyond it, something appeared. It wasn't a city, it wasn't a building, it was a fracture. A jagged tear in the fabric of reality, like a window into another world. I took a step closer, my breath catching in my throat. What the hell is that? Elara's grip tightened on Zyra. The sanctuary. The closer we got, the more unreal it became. The fracture in reality pulsed with energy, shifting and twisting like liquid light. It wasn't just a place, it was a threshold. A hidden passage disguised by advanced alien technology or something far beyond human understanding. Elara pressed forward. Inside, she urged. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to stop. I had seen a lot of things in my time. War, death, betrayal, but this was something else entirely. But then I looked at Zyra, still nestled in Elara's arms, her tiny fingers gripping her mother's sleeve. She was the reason we had made it this far. And I had come too far to back out now. I clenched my jaw. Then, gripping my rifle, I stepped forward and into the unknown. The world shifted around me. 1 second, I was in the scorching desert. The next, I was somewhere else. The sanctuary. It was like stepping into another planet. The air was cool, thick with the scent of damp earth and something electric. Towering bioluminescent trees stretched into the sky, their roots pulsing with soft golden light. Strange creatures flitted through the air, their wings translucent, their bodies shimmering like living stars. It was beautiful. And then, figures emerged from the shadows. Humanoid, but not human. They surrounded us, their violet eyes glowing in the dim light. Elara tensed beside me, clutching Zyra close. We come in peace, she said quickly. We are refugees. The tallest of them stepped forward. His gaze landed on Zyra and widened in shock. A ripple of whispers spread through the group. Then, finally, the tall one spoke. Impossible, he murmured. The child of the celestial bloodline lives? I frowned. Celestial bloodline? Elara swallowed hard. I told you. Zyra is special. The tall figure took another step closer, his voice low with reverence. She is not just special, she is royalty. The truth about Zyra. Elara lowered her gaze. I didn't want to tell you before. I couldn't risk it, but now you must know. She took a deep breath. The weight of the revelation settled over me like a crushing force. Zyra wasn't just a helpless child. She was the last of an ancient, powerful bloodline. The enforcers weren't merely hunting her. They were trying to erase her existence. And now, standing within the sanctuary's hidden domain, I knew one thing for certain. They were coming. And this time, we had nowhere left to run. The warning. The sanctuary's leader, Zyron, stood before us, his violet eyes dark with urgency. You brought them here, he said, his voice calm but firm. They will not stop until they have her. Elara straightened, Zyra still asleep in her arms. We didn't have a choice, Zyra nodded solemnly. Then we must prepare. The alien warriors moved swiftly, activating defenses hidden within the bioluminescent trees and along the glowing pathways. Shields shimmered to life, creating protective domes around critical areas. I watched as they distributed weapons, sleek, curved energy rifles, arming their people for a battle they had long feared. I tightened my grip on my own rifle. This wasn't just their fight anymore. It was mine too. I approached Zyron. Tell me what I need to do. He studied me for a moment. Then he handed me a weapon unlike anything I had ever seen, a dark, metallic gauntlet, embedded with pulsating blue crystals. You are not one of us, he said, but you have proven yourself. I slipped the gauntlet onto my arm. It felt alive. A sudden pulse of energy ran through my veins, synchronizing with my heartbeat. Zyra stepped closer. This will allow you to harness some of our energy. It will not make you as powerful as the celestial bloodline, but it will give you a chance. A chance? That was all I needed. Because if the enforcers wanted Zyra, they would have to go through me. The invasion begins. It started as a distant hum. Then the sky darkened. Dozens of enforcer ships descended like a swarm of locusts, their engines screaming through the air. The sanctuary's defenses activated instantly. Energy cannons fired beams of golden light slicing through the invaders. Shields shimmered as enemy fire rained down, explosions shaking the ground beneath our feet. And then they dropped. Black armored enforcers, hundreds of them, swarming through the jungle like shadows. I took position near the outer wall, my rifle at the ready. The first wave came fast, silent, efficient, lethal. I squeezed the trigger, plasma bolts tearing through their ranks. But for every one that fell, 3 more took their place. Then I saw him, the commander, a towering figure, clad in dark, flowing armor, his eyes burning with an unnatural glow. He stepped through the battlefield like a god of war, completely untouched by the chaos around him. He lifted a hand, and then the air cracked. A shockwave of invisible energy erupted from his palm, sending warriors flying, slamming them into trees, into walls. And straight toward me, I braced myself, but the force hit like a tidal wave. I was thrown crashing into the dirt. My head spun. When I looked up, he was standing over me. His voice was a deep, bone-chilling growl. You have something that belongs to me. I struggled to my feet, my gauntlet crackling with energy. She doesn't belong to you. His expression twisted into something almost amused. You think you can protect her? He raised his hand again, preparing to finish me. And then a blast of golden light shot past me. Zyra. She stood at the center of the battlefield, her tiny body trembling, her eyes glowing like twin stars. Energy swirled around her, lifting her small form off the ground. The enforcers froze. Even the commander hesitated. Then, with a single breath, Zyra unleashed her power. The world exploded in a surge of golden light. The trees bent from the force. The ground cracked beneath her. The enforcers, every single one, were lifted into the air, their weapons disintegrating in their hands. The commander roared, fighting against the force, but even he was not immune. The light engulfed him. And then it was over. The enforcers were gone. The battlefield was silent. Zyra floated gently to the ground, the last remnants of golden light flickering around her small frame. Her breathing was slow, steady. Then, her eyes fluttered closed. Elara ran to her, gathering her in her arms. I rushed to them, my heart pounding. Is she? She's alive, Elara whispered. Tears filled her eyes. She's alive! Relief washed over me like a wave. We had won. But at what cost? Zyra approached, his expression unreadable. She has awakened, he murmured. I swallowed hard. What does that mean? He looked at me. It means she is no longer just a child. He turned to Elara. She will need guidance, training. She is the last of her kind, the only one left to carry on the celestial bloodline. Elara nodded. I know. Zaren's gaze shifted to me. And you, he said, what will you do now? I looked down at Zyra, still asleep in her mother's arms. I had spent my whole life running, hiding. But now I had a reason to stay. I met Zyren's gaze. I'm not going anywhere. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The enforcers would come again, stronger, more prepared, but next time, so would we. Zyra stirred in her mother's arms, her tiny fingers reaching for me. I took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. For the first time in years, I wasn't running, I wasn't lost. I was home, and no matter what came next, I would be ready.